Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. We're here from NTT DATA to discuss our recently published trends report today. First of all, I would like my colleague Jose Manuel to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Jose Manuel Moreno, Director of Cybersecurity in Spain.
Hello, I am María Pilar Torres Bruna. I am the Cybersecurity Manager for NTT DATA in Iberia and Latin America. And as I was saying, today we want to discuss the main findings of our report. We have been developing cybersecurity for our clients for many years, but it was only a year or a year and a half ago that we decided to publish this report because we believe it plays a very important role in our work. Jose Manuel, what were our real motivations for starting to develop this report on a semi-annual basis?
Yes, well, it used to be a few years ago, the most important thing was the monitoring aspect, the information, but more closely related to the credentials, the source code that could have been uploaded either illicitly or by mistake. But little by little, it became important to really know who the attacker is, taking it to the side of intelligence in the purest style. We're not going to say military or police, but from the point of view of security. Customers need to know who is attacking them in order to defend themselves, and more importantly, they need to know the reasons why they are being attacked and develop their security strategies with that information. That's why, for some time now, our intelligence services have had a greater presence among our clients. And we also believed it was very positive to produce this report every 6 months, which was a cybersecurity intelligence overview of the last 6 months. And that from that, we could help the community, our clients, and all the people who work in the cyber world.
And precisely one of the first findings highlighted in the report is the sectors and countries most affected. When we talk about countries, we can cross it with the entire geopolitical situation we are currently experiencing. Tell us a little bit about which sectors and which countries are most relevant today in the world of cyber threats and cyber attacks.
Yes, from a sectoral point of view, the public sector, specifically public administration, is generally the most significantly affected sector. In fact, over the last year, there have been approximately 25% more attacks reported when compared to the same period during the previous year. And then, obviously, there are other sectors like the financial sector, which is also one of the most attacked, clearly for economic reasons, theft, phishing, or these types of attacks whose ultimate goal is, well, stealing money, right? Or obtaining financial rewards. The education sector, although, well, depending on the country, it can be more related to public or private administration, right? It's also one of the most attacked, along with companies in the ICT and telecommunications sector. Then, from a country perspective, the most attacked countries, well, they tend to be the ones that, let's say, are more in the spotlight, so to speak, right? In terms of military matters, wars, and geopolitical conflicts. The United States is historically the most attacked country. It receives a large part of the attacks, of the total number of attacks globally. In fact, that number continues to grow year after year. India is also one of the most attacked countries, and in our latest report, that's what we see for various reasons. Obviously, with all the geopolitical conflicts that currently exist, Israel is in the top 3, and other countries like France and Ukraine as well, right? Ultimately, as we can see, the attacks are related to countries that are in armed conflicts or are experiencing other kinds of geopolitical tensions.
It's interesting, isn't it, to see that now cyber attacks are, well, another type of weapon or even a tool that a country's sectors and companies themselves can have to become much more profitable and to grow. Because in the end, if you make your organization more secure, it will be more sustainable and more stable over time. We also see that the types of attacks aren't unique, right? And so we're starting to talk about global threats because the same types of threats are used. We see them across different sectors and in different countries. In fact, there are a series of incidents that are quite impactful. Tell us about one or two of them to give a little more detail to our listeners.
Yes, exactly. As you said, Maria, The concept of hybrid warfare is a concept that's being used more and more, right? Where armed conflicts happen in both worlds, the digital and the real world, where the digital world is practically the day-to-day, right? It happens first in the digital world and then later in the real world. Then, regarding the attacks, in our report, we highlight about 10, 15 attacks that have been quite relevant of those. Well, we can talk about one that affected and is still affecting United Health, which is a company in the healthcare sector, primarily in the North American market. It had a pretty significant security breach. This attack came from this breach actually came from a previous ransomware attack through which millions of sensitive customer data records were stolen. In fact, the situation was so serious that United Health did what you're not supposed to do, which was pay the ransom. It's estimated at around 22 million euros paid to the threat group that carried out the attack, which is Black Cat. It's called Black Cat, one of the most famous in recent years for this type of attack. And even after paying the ransom that Black Cat demanded, they didn't manage to get their information back or decrypt the systems that had been encrypted. And finally, they had to obviously notify the authorities. There was, and there continues to be, quite a lot of turmoil in the US Senate over this entire data leak. And honestly, United Health is also suffering quite a bit from this attack in different areas. One of them is its stock market valuation, right? Where you can see that in the last year, it has lost a large part of its value and continues to suffer because it can't escape the repercussions of the attack. Then there's Coinbase, which is one of the main or the main cryptocurrency exchange. It also suffered another attack that likely resulted from bribes to personnel associated with Coinbase, not direct employees, but most likely subcontracted staff. Usernames were revealed, and through those usernames, various threat groups were able to access systems that were not sufficiently secured. From there, they were also able to steal both company and customer information. Here, the number of affected customers isn't as large as in the United Health case. I don't think I mentioned it, but for United Health, the number of affected customers was over 190 million. That is almost half of the United States. In the case of Coinbase, it's less, it's 69,000. And in both cases, there are open federal investigations to determine responsibility. So you can see, right, that all these types of attacks and information leaks have very serious repercussions for the companies that suffer them.
Of course, and those are just two of the 15 that are detailed, which are also a small part of all the attacks we are experiencing today. Especially since today technology is increasingly taking on a key role within organizations and as part of how we are evolving as a society. If we're going to talk about emerging attack trends here, we clearly and obviously have to talk about AI, which is playing an increasingly important role. I would like to talk about at least two emerging trends. AI is already on the agendas of all major companies. On the one hand, we are seeing how businesses are using artificial intelligence to evolve their businesses, to create new ways of communicating with their own customers. But there is also a misuse of AI, and we are seeing how hackers themselves are already using artificial intelligence to make their attacks on organizations much more sophisticated or much more powerful. And it is also being used to create fake news or improve identity theft techniques. And this is one of the trends that we are seeing increase. In this increase in cyber attacks. Jose Manuel, tell us about another emerging trend in terms of new technologies used to improve attacks.
Yeah, well, let's say the franchise concept is also being brought into the world of cybersecurity, obviously from a dark side. Let's say a few years ago, in 2019 to 2020, an organization called Lockbit started, which popularized the creation of malware and other artifacts that serve to attack companies or attack people, creating those kinds of artifacts and, let's say, selling them to other attackers, which wasn't Lockbit in the first person. Then there were other people who bought directly or indirectly. When we say indirectly, perhaps they didn't buy directly, but gave Lockbit a share of the profits from the attack if it turned out satisfactorily for its creator. And that's how malware was created as a franchise, or malware as a service. It's a growing trend, and more groups are creating malware and other devices used to attack these companies, and that are distributed to many people who intend to do so, do not have the technical knowledge, but with these devices that they either buy or manage to use through this franchise model, they attack many organizations and citizens. Well, then, from the point of view of going back a bit to artificial intelligence, I'd like to make a comment. In our report, there's actually a figure that clearly shows the main types of attacks, right? Such as ransomware, phishing, denial of service, deep fake, and so on. And it's very evident that in all those attacks where AI is able to help the attacker, to make services scale more or to generate that malware or that attack more quickly and in a more personalized way, not so generically, the number of attacks is increasing significantly compared to the same period last year. That is obviously a direct consequence of the use of AI by these threat groups.
And looking at this increase and these categories of attacks, right, that are more prevalent, well, indeed, there's really interesting information here. There's a first interesting point for organizations in ensuring they are well protected against attacks of phishing, and how they are raising this awareness precisely to be able to avoid attacks of deepfake. We also can't forget about the other two. I mean, the others, sorry, but it's true that those two are taking on a particular importance. Let's continue by talking a bit about the findings we've had on the dark web. So I'd like for you to start by commenting, Jose Manuel, first of all, what is the dark web and why is it relevant when we do or is this type of research, whether for the report or as part of the tasks we might do in cybersecurity? Oh, and then I'd like you to tell us a little about the story of Breach Forum, how it was shut down and what kind of consequences that had. Because even if they are always positive, in the end, it leads to a decentralization of certain activities, which means it's clear that the activity doesn't stop.
That's right. Yes, starting from the beginning, the dark web or deep web or dark net, depending on the term, is ultimately a network that requires something specific to access. You don't access it directly like the internet. Normally, almost anyone can access it if they know how. And one of the important points of these networks is that it preserves anonymity quite well, right? Many of you will know the Tor network, where through multiple hops, right, it's possible to hide your identity. Some are better at hiding it than others, of course, but it allows you to hide your IP and your origin, right? And that way, it's much more difficult to trace you. This is perfect for those who want to do illicit actions because they are able to carry out these actions in a much more anonymous way than on the, let's say, traditional network. Within these networks, there are obviously different sites and forums, and other places where it is possible to find very illegal things. Obviously, others may not necessarily be illegal, but they are used for illegal purposes. It's true that there are places that these are the ones that are used and closely monitored by the police because they share information about child pornography and all that kind of stuff. But there are others, such as the Breach Forum case, where it was widely used by different groups of attackers to share information about stolen data, compromised access, or logs, with the aim, in many cases, of being able to sell them to third parties. For example, imagine that there is an attacker who wants to attack company X, and that in this forum he can find relevant information about that company X and can buy it, in fact, quite cheaply. That can help him carry out his attack accurately. This particular forum that Mapi is talking about, Breach Forum, was one of the most famous forums on the deep web, which was selling this information, and it fell before the summer approximately because its administrators were located by the police and arrested. It's true they tried to sell the forum, but oh well, it seems that for now they haven't sold it. So what's going on is, well, all this information and all this activity is being distributed through other sites, some of which already existed, and new ones are being created. Well, in the end, this is going to be a constant struggle. If even one falls, it won't be enough. We'll have to keep going, fighting against these kinds of places.
And in this world, as we have detailed, there are actors and groups that are already very well identified. New groups and actors keep appearing. Each of them has a way of operating. Tell us some news that has anything particularly caught your attention about a new actor or a new group?
Yes, here we would differentiate between two types of groups. The groups, let's say the usual ones that carry out this type of action, normally for economic reasons, and sometimes not only for economic reasons, but also for geopolitical reasons. And here are some like Sector 16, which is a Russian group. It focuses on attacking critical infrastructure, anything related to oil, gas, water, and what it seeks is to shut down systems or alter their operation to generate problems that are very serious, and that is mainly focused on the United States, also some countries in Spain, including ours. Then I'd also like to highlight another type of threat group. These groups are called APTS, right, which are advanced persistent threats. These are groups that normally belong to an actor or a group, let's say, that is sponsored by a state. And here the motivations are political, even military, where the goal is sabotage, disinformation, basically to destabilize other countries through prolonged disinformation campaigns or by carrying out specific attacks, right? For instance, many times lately we've heard about certain attacks on nuclear power plants and other critical infrastructures that, let's say, are quite related to these threat groups. One of the most famous, in fact, is Lazarus, which is the threat group from North Korea, and there are countless attacks that they have used in different countries, mainly in the United States.
To combat all of this, new laws are appearing on cybersecurity that, well, aim to, on one hand, help companies to increase and reinforce their security controls. Here we could have regulations like, or best practices like NIS2. Some also regulate the use of artificial intelligence, which obviously, on one hand, they mark responsible use, especially in the European Union, where a regulation has already been passed, but it also aims to somehow limit the uses, lawful and legal uses, and ensure the proper use of artificial intelligence. The truth is that hearing all these findings, all these regulations are seen as points of support and points of help, not so much as new points to have to adopt, but rather as necessary points today to be able to combat everything we're talking about. These regulations have allowed us or have allowed for well relevant detections that we also include in our report. Tell us about one that may have caught your attention.
Yes, yes. Well, in the end, this also varies by region, right? Here, depending on the region, some are created and others aren't, and as you'd expect, right? In Europe, it's normally the region that is more advanced, right? And that is more structured in terms of regulation. And in cybersecurity, well, it's not an exception. As for new regulations, there's a regulation like the Cyber Resilience Act that, in fact, it's being published this year, right? That reinforces security in digital products, in connected software, and that requires manufacturers and providers of these types of solutions to include cybersecurity from the design stage. And this can certainly affect us as a company because these types of regulations, such as those set by authorities, are relevant and applicable to our projects. Then there's the famous AI Act, which doesn't just have implications from a security standpoint. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but it's a global law that aims to regulate the responsible use of artificial intelligence in Europe, which also classifies artificial intelligence systems by their respective risk level, explicitly prohibits some of their potential uses, and also has significant implications from a cybersecurity point of view, especially in terms of data protection and system integrity. In Spain, There's a new law on cybersecurity coordination and governance that aims to consolidate the national framework and public-private collaboration in the cybersecurity field. And then there are, both NIS2 and DORA, right? NIS2 affects companies that are considered important, where a series of security controls are imposed that, they have to comply with if they want to provide services to large companies, obviously, and collaborate with the public sector. And also, if they don't comply and have an incident, they can face quite significant sanctions. And then DORA, which mainly affects the banking and insurance sectors and imposes very important regulations. In North America and Latin America, there are also other new regulations being published or improved. In the United States, for example, the HIPAA privacy rule is being updated for 2025, including more rules and more security controls. And in other countries like Chile, for example, the cybersecurity framework law is being published this year, which identifies new controls and obviously requires companies to do much more in the field of cybersecurity.
And finally, I'd like to provide a brief commentary in a little more detail on how each CISO of each organization can use this report to improve their security. So, what's your vision on that? How can we use this report to be more cyber secure and more cyber resilient?
Yes, I think that a CISO, right, the first thing they can get from this report is how their company is affected, right, in relation to the sector, right? I mean, if you're in the industry sector or the telecommunications sector, the report can give you an idea of who the attackers are and what their motivation might be to attack you within your sector. Also, review those same aspects from a geographical point of view, right? Often these attacks are also very focused on geography, not just by sector, and it's very important to know these attackers to investigate a little, right? In the report, we identify the attacks that are most common from these threat actors, and that way it's possible to identify, what kinds of attacks might be coming our way, and thus be able to improve our security strategy, including implementing new security controls and avoiding anything that might, leave a door open or ajar for a group of this type to attack us. We talk about many other things in the report, like vulnerabilities, which vulnerabilities are being used the most. And it's important to keep that in mind, to ask our technical teams to review them, so we can see if we have any of these types of vulnerabilities within our own house. And we should also be aware, because there's a section where we make it quite clear the estimated cybersecurity spending. For companies in different areas, it could be in the area of sanctions, protection, or the repercussions of a potential cyber attack, And so having all this information is very valuable for a CISO because it allows them to go to their board of directors or their CEO and put this data on the table, data that can be very important when making relevant decisions for the companies.
Well, I totally agree. I think each of these pages is super interesting for CISO. As you've said, we can get information about what kind of attacks companies in our region are experiencing, or companies from other regions but in the same sector, why these attacks occurred, and it can somehow be cross-referenced with what we're doing, how secure we are, or with those cybersecurity projects we might have on the roadmap. And the interesting thing about this report is that an update comes out every 6 months with new information, updated information that also helps us to keep our plan and our vision of what is happening correctly updated around us, in our region, and in the entire world. Well, thank you all very much for your time. This has been what we wanted to tell you about the trend report for the first half of 2025. We hope it has been of interest to you.